to help us make sense of it. Let's go ahead and welcome in NC Congressman Brad Knott. How you doing this morning, sir?
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm good. Can I have the real JFK files? These are not exciting enough. Do you have the real ones up there in your office, or what?
If I had them, you would see them.
Do you have the Epstein list? On a more serious note, I make it a point that every one of you guys up in Washington, or gals for that matter, I interview, I'm just going to remind you that we really want to see those. Pam Bondi said she had them on her desk twice. So what's going on with that? Are you or any of your other congressional members maybe in her ear trying to hurry this process along? Because I honestly think if you guys don't release them by the midterms, it's going to be made a campaign issue. So
yeah, I think you're right, and we have certainly echoed the sentiments of our constituents and people from all over the country when there's a promise made, such as the one that Ms. Bondi made, to release those files. We expect it to happen, and we have certainly seen nothing to the contrary other than this delay that would indicate that she's gone back on her promise. But we need it to be released, and why it hasn't been, I do not have that answer. But we have been relaying those wants and concerns to the Attorney General.
Yeah, I'm not alleging. I'm not on conspiracy yet. Maybe I'll get there, but admittedly, that whole thing with the influencers holding their Willy Wonka golden tickets, admittedly, the optics looked really bad on that. You would agree?
I agree. Yeah. I agree.
So I think
if they weren't prepared to release the full files, they should have never made a partial release or just sort of a symbolic release.
Okay. Well, that's me harassing you, and then every time we talk going forward, I will harass you again. So
I'll be prepared.
Job, but it kind of is because it's your team. So let's get that handled. But I want to talk about the insanity yesterday, and more so the insanity that we've seen in these 2 months, and that is these judges. All right. So yesterday they just basically said that you guys gotta put all the "you said" stuff back. Please don't do that. What is the plan now for a ruling like that, where this judge says, well, no, you can't just defund and get rid of all these USAID programs. We need transgender operas in Colombia, damn it. So I know the White House is figuring out how they're going to deal with it. How does Congress react to that when you have these judges essentially saying that the other two branches of government you guys can all go home, we'll handle this? Like, this is turning into, and I hate to use the term, a bit of a constitutional crisis. Would you agree?
You're exactly right, Casey, and because of that nature, it is a little bit, I would say, tedious for Congress to move forward. I mean, there have been very limited judicial impeachments in our history. Most of them were tied to instances of bribery, and some of those judges, whenever they were brought before the impeachment tribunal, they resigned before the cases were ever heard or adjudicated. Mm-hmm. And there are very clear delineations of power, right? Article 2 is very clear with what it affords the president and the executive branch. Article 3 is what lays out the judicial branch. And what we have seen repeatedly, really only with President Trump, is the infringement from the Article 3 branch into the Article 2 branch. I mean, just as an example, there have been close to 80 nationwide injunctions between President Trump's first term and President Trump's existing term. And George W. Bush, in 8 years, had 6. Right. President Barack Obama had, I think President Obama had 10 or 14, something like that. So there's obviously a very real effort to hamstring the executive because President Trump has been so serious in reforming how the executive branch has really assumed far too much power through the executive agencies. And the left has done an effective job at this point at thwarting it through the judicial branch. And that's something that we have to address, no question about it.
Yeah, and the way now, let's talk about the ways in which this is supposed to be handled, because it would be more clear cut if these judges were taking bribes, right? Because that's easy, you can find that out. But this is one that is born of ideology, right? And I think that's what most people assign this to. And the way that this is supposed to be dealt with is twofold. One, you guys shouldn't have to deal with it. What is your understanding of John Roberts' responsibility, who, by the way, decided to issue a statement? This guy didn't issue a statement when his fellow justices' homes were under attack and one of them had a hitman show up. But he issued a statement on this yesterday saying this is not the place of the president and Congress to do it based on a ruling, was his beef. What is your understanding of John Roberts' role in policing the judiciary? Because most people don't realize he is the head of the judiciary at large from a federal standpoint. And so normally there is a process by which he kind of slaps hands and deals with it. What is your understanding before we get to your responsibility?
You know, it's unfortunate because the Chief Justice he has long made very public his goal of keeping the court away from politics. And unfortunately, when he makes statements like this, especially given the abuses of the past and the present from the judiciary, where he has refused to step in and make statements, this statement rightfully seems to be very targeted in a political nature at the president, who is, again, rightfully frustrated at activist judges prohibiting him from doing his duty. And when Chief Justice Roberts wades into that debate in the way that he did, he is undermining his own goal of depoliticizing the courts. And as someone who came from a law enforcement background, who practiced in front of Article III judges every day, I share the goal of depoliticizing courts. It's imperative that we do so. However, that does not mean that the Supreme Court should not actively patrol and protect the court system from politically motivated judges. And when you look at a single district court judge in multiple instances across the country who are unilaterally micromanaging the executive branch, that should cause alarm across every jurisdiction in our country. And it's clearly been a problem for years. I mean, just going back to the immigration topic, Texas was ordered to remove barriers that were designed to protect their citizens from the invasion that was occurring over the last 4 years, an invasion that was bringing people from all over the world into our country, bringing drugs, bringing human traffickers, bringing violent criminals, bringing terrorists. All of this is known. The federal government neglected its sole responsibility, its chief responsibility to protect its citizens. Texas finally had enough. They erected a barrier, and an activist court, citing some type of procedural issue, ordered them to tear down the barrier. And then when President Trump is elected, he very rightfully recognizes his authority to protect the citizens of this country. He rounds up people who are here illegally. Let me put emphasis on that. People who are here illegally, who are criminals and part of a gang whose stated purpose is to commit heinous crimes and enrich themselves while doing it. He sends them home, and a judge orders the president to return those people to the United States. It's a disgusting comparison, again, of an activist judge and an activist judge problem, where they retreat to essentially a procedural issue that is not rooted in law, that's not rooted in constitutional principles, and it allows them to carry out their agenda. And going back to Chief Justice Roberts, there have been numerous instances where this has been raised, and it is the Supreme Court's job to adjudicate the district court judges when they get out of line, and specifically review how they utilize unilateral authority that is arguably not theirs to use.
Yeah, and let's be specific about what that looks like in a Supreme Court setting. So what it looks like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is it doesn't necessarily just have to be one individualized case. One of the things they can do while rendering a decision on a case, and a lot of people thought they might do this here with a recent case, is establish parameters as part of the ruling that become best practice further down the food chain. Is that an accurate way to say it?
In a roundabout way, that's correct. So basically, what the method that a lot of these courts utilize is they'll put into place something called a temporary restraining order, right? Okay. Or something that's generally non-appealable, which is in some ways a fiction, but they'll issue a stay or a restraining order. And in so doing, they will effectively stop a policy that's designed or that's in effect that affects the entire country. And if the executive branch will appeal that, they can seek expedited review at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can essentially box in a lower court, a district court, and give guidelines or parameters as to how these types of mechanisms should be used. And again, if the federal courts continue to issue these types of policies, arguably in abuse of their authority, I think there's no question that they're being abused, then the Supreme Court should be under an obligation to adjudicate the lower court's use of these types of procedural powers.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear too. It's a time thing. Like, I see people think that the judges assume their rulings are going to hold up. No. If you don't get them to step in, the Supreme Court, in an emergency manner, then you start peeling away years of the Trump presidency as this thing slowly moves through the court, and you can bet that the strategy is to delay it, and then you accomplish the same thing. So this is why it's so insidious as to what's going on here, and I think speaks to the fact that they understand that they're overreaching, if I could just pretend to be a lawyer for a moment.
Yes. There's no question about it. The Democrats know that just about on every main issue that's important to the United States public, they're on the wrong side of it, by and large, as a party, whether it's illegal immigration, whether it's educational policy, whether it's taxing and spending. They're on the wrong side of it. And they are really struggling right now from a legislative standpoint to find the darts that they want to use in the political arena. So what have they done? They have retreated to the courts to try to slow down the momentum of Republicans and President Trump, who quite honestly have found a great foothold politically by carrying out the will of the American people. And you're exactly right, Casey. Delaying this is not only a tactic, but it's very nefarious. They are trying to bind up the hands of the executive, who is moving decisively, doing things that we elected him to do. And typically it takes 18 to 24 months at least to get up to the Supreme Court. That's half of his term. That's a full congressional term. And again, it's quite nefarious. You're right.
And so now going back to you, now John Roberts, though, he was saying that impeachment is not appropriate just because you disagree with the decision. I don't think that necessarily which one of your colleagues filed the impeachment thing the other day?
There's several of my colleagues who have on a case-by-case basis filed the impeachment, and Mr. Crane, Mr. Gill from Texas, Eli Crane, Brandon Gill from Texas.
Okay, but here's what I'm asking: this is a thing that is literally parts of checks and balances, right? There's two different standards by which you can seek the high crimes and misdemeanors, and then there's bad behavior. I'm probably misquoting what exactly it is, and so, like, John Roberts is not accurate. It literally, this is something that is part of your job should you have to do it, but it is a high bar. So,
it's a very high bar. It's a very high bar, and that's why. It's only been utilized. I think, maybe a dozen times in our 250-year history. And again, it's been for something very open and shut, like bribery.
I want to know, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just have about a minute and a half. I want to know. So, what are you guys going to do? Can you just not fund this? But then you're not going to get a budget passed. The Democrats will stymie that if you don't include the insane spending there, right? So, like, I don't want to hear that your guys' hands are tied 100%. Like, the Democrats have clearly figured out a strategy to try to screw everyone over who voted for this administration. How are the Republicans going to get down in the dirt? What are you guys going to do? I got about a minute.
That's a great question, and again, those articles of impeachment have been filed. We'll look at these things on a case-by-case basis. We have introduced in the Judiciary Committee a statute that will basically require Article III judges to refrain from enacting nationwide injunctions, especially if the two parties are not before them immediately. That will prohibit them from being instruments of the left on a nationwide basis. That particular law has made it out of committee. I was in the hearing that debated that law, excuse me. So there are things that we can do legislatively. The impeachment process, unfortunately, because it is such a high bar, I think that the Democrats will very much delay that into Congress.
I don't think you guys are going to get that. And I'm sorry, I got about 10 seconds. I'll have to leave.
It's a very high bar, and personally, I think changing the law and making jurisdiction very clear is our best shot.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that you guys are coming at this from a few directions. Appreciate it, Congressman, and we will be back.